The year is 1821. Mexico has just broken free from Spain after a bloody war of independence. But instead of peace, the nation is thrown into a storm of chaos. For more than 50 years, Mexico would not know stability. One ruler after another rises, only to be toppled by force. Presidents, generals, and dictators shuffle through the halls of power in a dizzying cycle of betrayal and rebellion. Every promise of democracy is crushed under the weight of ambition. The nation bleeds. Wars erupt against Spain, against the United States, against France. Each conflict strips Mexico of its strength, its treasure, and most painfully, its land. By the mid-19th century, the once vast republic has lost over half of its territory. Bankrupt, fractured, and humiliated, Mexico seems to stand on the brink of collapse. Cities lie in ruin, the countryside is restless, and foreign armies march across its soil with impunity. And yet, in the ashes of despair, a question lingers. Could Mexico ever rise again? By 1876, the answer would come, not in peace or compromise, but with the iron hand of a general named Porfirio Díaz. The year is 1876. Out of the chaos, one man seizes the moment. Porfirio Díaz, a battle-hardened general who has fought in nearly every war of Mexico's turbulent past. Tired of instability, Díaz takes matters into his own hands. In keeping with Mexico's violent tradition, he does not win power with ballots, but with bullets. Yet Díaz is no ordinary usurper. After overthrowing the US-backed liberal government, he does the unthinkable. He calls for an election. Against all odds, he wins. To a nation weary of tyrants and endless coups, Díaz promises something different, an end to despotism and the beginning of true democracy. One of his first acts shocks the political elite. He amends the Constitution to ban presidential re-election. For the first time in decades, Mexico seems to be turning toward a brighter, more democratic future. In 1880, Díaz even steps down voluntarily, handing the presidency to his ally Manuel González. To the outside world, this looks like progress, a nation finally breaking free of its violent past. But beneath the surface, shadows remain. For González is no independent leader, he is Díaz's puppet, and soon the general will return, stronger than ever. When Díaz returned to power in 1884, he made one thing clear: democracy was over. The ban on re-election? Erased. The press that dared to criticize him? Silenced. And so began an era that would shape Mexico for over 3 decades, the Porfiriato. On the surface, it was a golden age. Railroads carved through mountains and deserts, binding the fractured nation together. Mines, oil fields, and textile mills roared to life, fueled by foreign investment. For the first time in its history, Mexico paid off its crushing foreign debt. Wealth and progress glittered in the cities, and the world began to see Mexico not as a broken republic, but as a nation reborn. But beneath that shine lay deep cracks. The haciendas, vast estates owned by elites, swallowed the countryside, driving peasants from their ancestral lands and chaining them to lives of poverty. The riches of industry flowed not to Mexican hands, but to foreign investors and a privileged few. And while Díaz held Mexico in his iron grip, resentment smoldered in the hearts of those left behind. For Díaz, power was secure, but for the people, anger was growing. Mexico was transforming, yet this transformation was building toward an inevitable explosion. Behind the glitter of railroads, factories, and foreign wealth, another Mexico was being forged, one of despair and betrayal. The Porfiriato gave stability, but at a terrible price. Local states lost their autonomy as Díaz centralized power in Mexico City. Governors and regional elites, once powerful, now bowed before the iron will of the president. The press, shackled. Critics, jailed. Democracy, a memory. And for the people, The price was even higher. The countryside, once the heart of Mexican life, was consumed by sprawling haciendas. Peasants who had farmed their land for generations were stripped of it, forced to toil as laborers for landowners who grew rich off their misery. Promises of prosperity turned to chains of poverty. Foreign companies tightened their grip, owning the railroads, the mines, the oil fields. Mexico's wealth flowed outward, leaving its own people in the shadows. To the privileged, Díaz was a visionary. To the common people, he was a tyrant. Resentment spread like wildfire, burning silently beneath the surface. The poor, the dispossessed, the silenced, they were waiting. And when the spark finally came, Mexico would erupt in a revolution unlike anything the nation had ever seen. By 1910, Díaz had ruled for more than 3 decades. He was old, but still unyielding. At first, he hinted that he would finally step aside. Hope stirred across Mexico. But then, he changed his mind. Not only would he stay in power, he would crush anyone who dared oppose him. One man refused to be silenced: Francisco Madero. Wealthy, idealistic, and determined, Madero promised something Díaz had stolen long ago: free elections. His movement spread quickly, igniting dreams of change across the country. But Díaz struck first, jailing Madero before the election could even begin. Fate, however, was not on Díaz's side. Madero escaped to the United States, and from exile he sent out a call that would change history. Rise Up, on November 20th, 1910. Across Mexico, the oppressed answered. In the north, the fiery outlaw Pancho Villa rallied fighters to his banner. In the south, peasant leader Emiliano Zapata raised an army of farmers with the promise of land and freedom. The revolution had begun. What started as a rebellion against an aging dictator was about to explode into a nationwide war, a war that would tear Mexico apart and reshape it forever. The rebellion swept across Mexico like wildfire. Federal troops, once feared, crumbled before the determination of peasants and revolutionaries. In the north, Pancho Villa's cavalry outmaneuvered Díaz's soldiers. In the south, Emiliano Zapata's peasant army struck with fury. The dictator's grip was slipping. By the spring of 1911, it was clear Porfirio Díaz's time was over. Facing defeat and desperate to prevent more bloodshed, the old general made a decision that shocked the nation. After more than 30 years in power, he resigned. With dignity gone and enemies everywhere, Díaz boarded a ship into exile, never to see Mexico again. Into the vacuum stepped Francisco Madero, the man whose call had set the revolution ablaze. When Díaz fled, the people cheered, and Madero was hailed as the savior of Mexico's democracy. In the fall of 1911, he was elected president. For the first time in generations, Mexico seemed free of dictatorship. But freedom came with a price. Madero faced a nation still boiling with rage, peasants demanding land, revolutionaries unwilling to disarm. He had promised change, but could he truly deliver? Mexico had won its revolution against Díaz, but the real struggle was only beginning. Francisco Madero entered the presidency with hope blazing in his heart. But governing a nation torn by decades of chaos was no simple task. The peasants demanded land reform. Revolutionaries demanded rewards for their loyalty. The middle class wanted stability. And the old elites, bitter at losing their power, plotted in the shadows. Madero tried to balance it all, but instead he pleased no one. Most damning of all, he hesitated to deliver the land redistribution promised to the poor. To Emiliano Zapata and his followers, this was nothing less than betrayal. As rebellion flared again in the south, Madero turned to one of his generals for help, Victoriano Huerta. But Huerta had ambitions of his own. Behind closed doors, he struck a deal, with the support of U.S. diplomats in Mexico City. Together, they planned a coup. In February 1913, the plot unfolded. Federal troops turned on their own president. Gunfire thundered through Mexico City. Within days, Madero was arrested, forced to resign, and then executed. The dream of democracy was dead. The revolution's first hero had fallen, not to Diaz, but to treachery within his own camp. And Mexico was once again plunged into darkness. Victoriano Huerta seized power drenched in blood. To his supporters, he was a strong man who could bring order. To his enemies, he was nothing but a usurper and a drunkard. From the very moment he took the presidency, opposition rose like a storm on the horizon. In the north, Venustiano Carranza, governor of Coahuila, refused to bow. He declared Huerta illegitimate and raised the banner of rebellion. Alongside him stood a cast of men who would soon become legends: Pancho Villa, the bandit-turned-general, and Álvaro Obregón, a brilliant strategist new to the stage of war. In the south, Emiliano Zapata kept his armies in the field, swearing to fight until land was returned to the people. Together, this unlikely alliance closed in on Huerta from every side, and then the tide turned further. The United States, once a silent partner in Huerta's coup, abandoned him. American warships seized Veracruz, cutting off his last lifeline. By the summer of 1914, Huerta's position was hopeless. Surrounded, hated, and powerless, he resigned and fled into exile. But victory brought no peace. With the dictator gone, the revolutionaries now turned their eyes on each other. The real battle for Mexico's future was about to begin. With Huerta gone, Mexico finally stood free of dictatorship. But victory quickly turned to bitterness. The revolutionaries, once united, now faced an impossible question: who would rule Mexico? At first, Carranza declared himself the rightful president. He spoke of political reform, of building institutions, of slow and steady progress. But to Villa in the north and Zapata in the south, his words rang hollow. They demanded action. Immediate, land for the peasants, justice for the poor, and sweeping social change. The alliance shattered. Brothers in arms became bitter enemies. In late 1914, Villa and Zapata marched into Mexico City in triumph. But neither man wanted the burden of governing. Their hesitation proved fatal. Carranza and his brilliant general Álvaro Obregón regrouped, striking back with ruthless efficiency. The civil war that followed was brutal. Villa's legendary cavalry was cut to pieces by Obregón's trenches, barbed wire, and machine guns. Tactics learned from the Great War raging in Europe. Zapata was slowly driven back to his home state of Morelos, his forces crumbling. By 1917, Carranza stood in command of Mexico, drafting a bold new constitution. But even as he consolidated power, blood still stained the soil. The revolution was far from finished. By 1917, Venustiano Carranza stood as master of Mexico. From the chaos of war, he unveiled a bold new vision, a constitution unlike any the world had seen. It guaranteed workers' rights, land reform, and even limits on the power of the church. Mexico, scarred and bloodied, seemed ready to be reborn. But Carranza's triumph was fragile. His refusal to fully embrace land reform made him enemies. His former ally, Álvaro Obregón, grew restless. In 1920, when Carranza tried to handpick a successor, Obregón struck back. Once again, Mexico watched as a president fled the capital in desperation. Carranza would never reach safety. He was ambushed and killed on the road to Veracruz. Obregón took power, bringing stability at last. But the revolution's blood price was staggering. Over 1 million Mexicans dead, countless others forced to flee north into the United States. The dream of justice had been won, but at an unimaginable cost. Even Obregón himself would not escape the cycle. In 1928, he was assassinated, the last of the great revolutionary leaders to fall. Yet their struggle left a legacy that endures. the 1917 Constitution, and a political system that would shape Mexico for the next century. From decades of turmoil and rivers of blood, a new Mexico was forged. The revolution devoured its own heroes, Zapata, Villa, Carranza, Obregón. Yet from their sacrifices rose a nation determined to define its own destiny. The Constitution of 1917 reshaped society, land, and power, while the PRI's long rule ensured both stability and stagnation. The echoes of rebellion still pulse through Mexico's streets, in its politics, its people, and its unyielding spirit. The Mexican Revolution was not just a war, it was a rebirth, one that continues to shape the soul of a nation to this day.